I've loved David for a solid 10 years. He was born with a cold demeanor, yet he never opposed our marriage. He was willing to until that day, when I braved a heavy downpour to bring him his stomach medicine. I walked in just as the daughter of their partner company was urging him to drink. I stepped forward to stop her, but his voice was laced with contempt. Do you really think you're the young mistress of the Tudor family? Mind your own business. In that bustling bar, my tears mingled with the rain and streamed down. David, from now on, your affairs are no longer mine. Lights flickered and danced in the bar. I clutched the stomach medicine in my hand, my whole body icy cold. Playful and disdainful glances from around me fell on me, but what stung the most was David's impatient expression. He had a weak stomach. He had to take medicine after meals, otherwise the pain would flare up. I'd called him countless times earlier, but no one answered. I'd had to ask around to find the address of tonight's gathering. The rain started pouring just as I was approaching. It was rush hour, only 500 meters away, yet the navigation showed it would take half an hour. Anxious to get the medicine to David, I ran all the way. Sucked through in the dim light, Sarah leaned in his arms, cooing as she fed him wine. This man, who'd always hated physical contact with others, now let the girl in his arms do as she pleased. When I pushed the door open, her wine glass was just touching David's lips. An indescribable air of intimacy hung in the air. A pang of bitterness hit my heart. And all I could think of was David's pale face when his stomachique flared up. The words slipped out before I could stop them. He can't drink. The crowd fell silent at once. I looked down, instinctively noticing the small, muddy stain my black shoes had left on the floor. A sudden wave of embarrassment washed over me. But what embarrassed me more was David's reply. He leaned back on the sofa and clicked his tongue softly. Do you really think you're the young mistress of the Tudor family? Mind your own business. He didn't even glance at me as he tilted his head back and drained the whiskey in one gulp. The words I hadn't yet said got stuck in my throat. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I could only fight back tears, trying to look less disheveled. The others, catching on, tacitly averted their eyes, treating me like invisible air as they moved around. They carefully stepped around me. One girl, unable to bear it, handed me a dry towel, but was immediately pulled away by her friend. Why are you bothering with her? Rainwater kept dripping from my hair. Memories flashed before my eyes, one after another. I suddenly understood. David never opposed this marriage, not because he was willing, but because he simply didn't care. He didn't care about the agreement between Mrs. Tudor and Grandma, and he didn't care about me. To put it more harshly, he disdained it all. Because of that disdain, he stayed silent when others said I wasn't good enough for him. Because of that disdain, my heartfelt concern came across as nothing but meddling in his eyes. Embarrassment, grievance, and anger tangled together, eventually dissolving into a strange calm. I dried my hair bit by bit, quietly placed the stomach medicine on the table, and took one last look at David. Then I left the bar without looking back. The lights at Tudor Manor were still on. Mrs. Tudor and some friends were sitting in the living room, drinking tea. I stood at the door changing my shoes, and their conversation drifted clearly to my ears. Qiu, you're not really going to let David marry that little maid, are you? Honestly, you're being too superstitious. Kids are prone to getting sick anyway. Look at David now. He's all grown up, and his health is just fine, isn't it? The speaker was Mrs. Tudor's best friend. Ever since David and I got engaged, she disliked me from every angle. She said things like this not just behind my back, but to my face too. More than once. Mrs. Tudor sighed. Eleanor's had a tough time, too. She takes really good care of David. I'll compensate her when David gets married. Tears burst from my eyes. I bit my lower lip hard, suddenly remembering how Mrs. Tudor had cried and begged me not to leave. Back then David had been in poor health since he was a child. When he was 14, he even had a life-threatening illness. Desperate, Mrs. Tudor had turned to a famous Taoist monk for help. And that monk had taken a liking to me. He said I had an extremely rare fortune-telling chart that would bring good luck to my husband. He claimed that as long as David and I got engaged, David's health would improve. That was how I, an orphan raised by the Tudor family's maid, suddenly became David's fiancée. David had always been cold to me. When I greeted him, he'd pretend not to see me. When I stole a glance at him, he'd frown and turn away. Once he had to leave early for something urgent, but I didn't know. Too afraid to go look for him in his classroom. I just waited at the school gate. I waited and waited, until the sky turned completely dark and the school was empty. Only then did I walk back to the tutor's house. Tears streaming down my face that day, I thought long and hard, and finally mustered the courage to tell Mrs. Tudor I wanted to call off the engagement, but Mrs. Tudor cried and begged me not to be angry with David. She even listed all sorts of things to prove that David liked me too. A few of her words still stick in my mind to this day. Elena, David's just a boy who doesn't know how to express his feelings, she said. He never says it, but deep down, he can't live without you. If he didn't like you, why would he walk to school with you every day? Why wouldn't he associate with other girls? And why wouldn't he object to this engagement? Because of those words from Mrs. Tudor, I endured David's cold stares year after year. Mrs. Tudor treated me better and better. Too sometimes, I'd even secretly imagined she was my own mother. But illusions, after all, are meant to shatter. While I was struggling to learn how to be a good wife and daughter, they'd already pronounced my death sentence behind my back. It was a house I'd lived in for 10 years, yet I didn't know if I should step inside at that moment on the pitch-black street. I called my college roommate. Luna, that job offer in America you mentioned. Does it still stand? When I got back to the Tudors, the tea party was already over. Mrs. Tudor saw I'd come back alone, and her face soured. Her voice carried a tinge of blame. Elena, why didn't you bring David back with you? As if I'd intentionally left David out there, but she knew full well no one could stop David from doing what he wanted. Once, Hagen Thorselva I'd sigh. Hearing her say that would have made me feel wronged, but more than that, anxious. Afraid I'd done something to displease her. Now though, I just stated the fact calmly. He didn't want to come back. You should have persuaded him, she insisted. You know how poor his health is. Who was he with? Why didn't you wait there for him? I lowered my eyes, not wanting to argue. Just his usual friends. And Sarah. At the sound of Sarah's name, Mrs. Tudor's expression softened instantly. So he was there too, huh? Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she frowned at me. I knew what she was thinking. She was just afraid my presence might upset Sarah. Unlike usual, I didn't grow anxious or grovel the moment I saw her displeasure. I changed my shoes without a word and went back to my room to pack. I had so few things at the Tudor's house. After throwing away what needed to be thrown, what was left fit perfectly into a 28-inch suitcase. Only one thing gave me pause: what to do with it. It was a teddy bear in a brown dress, given to me by David the day my grandma died. The young man had held me gently in his arms, his voice low and hoarse. Elena, don't be sad. I'll take care of you from now on. That sympathetic hug and promise. Foolishly, hugging Thorfeldma, I'd taken it as proof that David felt something different for me. The teddy bear stared straight at me. I'd thought about returning it to David. But then again, knowing his temperament, he'd probably just toss it in the trash without a second thought. I barely slept that night. Early the next morning, I carried my things downstairs. David was having breakfast, when he saw the bundle in my arms. A flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. But he said nothing, as indifferent as ever. It was Mrs. Tudor who asked, "Where are you going?" "Nowhere," I said. "Just clearing out some things I don't need to throw away." Before I could finish, David's phone rang. He answered briefly, then stood up to get his coat. Something came up at the company. "I'll head over now," doctored carefully. Mrs. Tudor reminded him. No one paid any more attention to my answer. I let out a bitter laugh and went out to hail a taxi. The Tudors had a driver, but I'd never used him. I earned my tuition and living expenses by working part-time, clinging to that meager pride in front of David. As if refusing to take anything from the Tudors would give me a little more composure when facing him. The busiest mall in the city was ablaze with bright lights. I stood at a counter, thinking of buying a brooch for Luna as a gift, when a familiar voice, sweet and coquettish, came from behind me. "Brother David, don't you think this necklace suits me?" I turned instinctively. The tall, stern man and the pretty young girl looked perfectly matched. Anyone would say so. I glanced away quickly, but our eyes met. A hint of irritation flickered in his. "What are you doing here?" I knew he thought I was following him back in high school. He'd go out with friends every weekend to relax. Mrs. Tudor, worried about him, had asked me to tag along. But those young masters and never liked me too scared to refuse Mrs. Tudor. I'd just trail behind them secretly. Whenever David caught me, I'd hang my head, stammering and unable to explain. But now, I pointed to the clerk who was wrapping a purchase, my expression calm. I'm buying a gift for Luna. I'll leave right away. David looked skeptical, his brow furrowed, but I didn't linger or say more. From start to finish, it was like running into a barely familiar acquaintance at the mall. When I got home, I knocked on Mrs. Tudor's door. After living at the Tudors for so many years, propriety demanded I say goodbye when I told her I was moving to America for work. She hesitated, then asked, America? What about your engagement with David? Just a childhood joke, I said. It doesn't count. At that, Mrs. Tudor feigned annoyance, but relief was plain on her face. What a child you are. Making such a big decision without even telling the family. Still, since you've decided, I won't stop you. You're both grown now. I shouldn't meddle in matters of the heart. When are you leaving? Looking at Mrs. Tudor. A bitter ache welled up in my chest, not for anyone else, but for the girl I'd once been. Tomorrow morning. So soon? This time, Mrs. Tudor truly looked shocked. Because tomorrow was her birthday. Every year on her birthday, I'd prepare a surprise and cook a full meal with my own hands. Mrs. Tudor would hug me and tease, a daughter-in-law really is the sweetest. That stubborn David would never cook for me. I paused, then went on, I won't attend your birthday party tomorrow. To avoid misunderstandings. We both knew exactly what misunderstandings I meant. She caught on too, her expression turning complicated as she hesitated, saying nothing. I took that as her silent consent. The next day, I timed my descent carefully. David was leaning against the sofa, giving the housekeeper detailed instructions for the party. Strands of his dark hair fell over his forehead, lending a rare boyish softness to his usual composure. Sarah, in a white evening gown, lounged against the arm of the sofa. They were so close, they might as well have been touching. My suitcase was heavy, it clattered against the marble stairs with a sharp sound. The people in the living room froze, turning to look at me. Sorry, I said politely, forcing a smile as I lifted the case higher. David stepped forward, nodding at my suitcase. What do you think you're doing? His expression was as cold as ever, as if he were asking about something trivial. Had the noise not disturbed him, and had it not been his mother's birthday, he probably wouldn't have bothered to ask at all. I didn't want to say much, so I gave a vague reply, some work to handle. I'll be gone a few days. David took another step closer, his gaze frosty. Today's my mother's birthday. It's urgent. I already told Mrs. Tudor. I tried to step around him, but he stood firm, radiating displeasure. When will you be back? I won't be. The words hovered on my lips, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. Today, of all days, felt wrong. Sarah spoke up, her voice honeyed. Are you the one who makes longevity noodles for Edgy every year? David said a few words to you the other day, and now you're skipping her birthday. People might think the Tudors did something to you. Pretending not to hear, I grabbed my suitcase and hurried past them. But David wouldn't let me go. He grabbed my wrist, the air growing thick with tension, as if the temperature had plummeted. His voice was low and icy, each word dripping with disdain. What urgent business could an amateur designer have? Was it really that big a deal? I didn't spare your feelings at the bar the other night? I stopped short so David did know it had embarrassed me, humiliated me. He just counted on me not to fight back, so he acted without a care. I turned to face him, my voice quiet but clear enough for him to hear. Yes, at what? David's breath hitched, followed by a long silence. He spoke only as I crossed the threshold. If you're leaving, go alone. Don't you dare use the Tudor driver. Rain was pouring outside. The maid, sensing the tension, stepped forward to mediate. Miss, it's pouring. At least wait for the rain to stop. She didn't know I was leaving for America, that I couldn't wait. David's voice turned colder. Maid, don't try to stop her. The maid, nearly in tears, fretted. In this downpour, you'll catch your death. My nose stung. I whispered something in her ear, and she finally let go. David had no idea I'd never once used any of the Tudor staff. The taxi I'd booked in advance was already at the door. As I walked out, I heard the maid making one last attempt. Master, she's really gone. David's reply gave nothing away, but it cut as sharply as ever. Let her go. She'll come crawling back. Begging, sooner or later. The tutor's house was close to the airport. After checking in, I had a few hours to spare. I found a restaurant and pulled out my design sketches. Luna had everything ready on her end. I just needed to arrive to start on the first collection. I bent over my tablet, sketching, and let myself imagine life in California. No more walking on eggshells. No more being a wood diffuser's caretaker. A life that was mine, and mine alone. A shadow blocked the light. I was in the middle of detailing lace cuffs. So I looked up, annoyed. Excuse me. David's face was taut with anger. He stood before me, hands in his trouser pockets, his damp hair clinging to his forehead, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Elena, are you done with this tantrum? I was speechless. So in David's eyes. Skipping his mother's birthday for work, refusing to take his cruelty, lying down as I always had, that was a tantrum. A wave of exhaustion washed over me. I didn't answer. Instead, I asked, how am I throwing a tantrum? I told you. I have work and I cleared it with Mrs. Tudor. David scoffed. Rainwater sliding down his sharp cheekbones. My mother's always been too kind to you. Of course she'd say yes. She's crying alone in your room right now. Fine, the bar thing was my fault. I'm sorry. Happy now. My pen froze. My key phrase jumped out at me. Mrs. Tudor was crying. So you came to fetch me back? Did she ask you to? No. If she had, she'd never let me pressure you. As if to prove his point, Sarah's voice came over his phone. David. Aunt said if Elena doesn't want to come back, let her bed on tea. Push her. In the background, voices murmured, Qiuu, you're too soft. The tutors fed her, housed her, and she skips out without a word. She's just playing hard to get. Thinks the tutors can't live without her. The Taoist back then probably hired by her grandmother to trick you. Honestly, who believes in that nonsense? For all we know, that old maid was the one making the young master sick in the first place. My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen, trembling, waiting for Mrs. Tudor to speak up. Several minutes passed, and the gossip had spiraled into insinuations about whether I'd snuck into David's bed at night. Finally, Mrs. Tudor spoke. She said, no matter what Elena has done, she'll always be like a daughter to me. Not a word of defense for me. Not a single attempt to stop their malicious speculations. Instead, with that one sentence, she cemented those absurd rumors. Each word cut into me like a blade, piercing to the bone. The last flicker of hope in my heart was snuffed out in that instant. I looked up, fixing my gaze on David. I'll go back with you. Inside the black Bentley. David's expression remained cold. Noticing me staring silently out the window, he offered a condescending consolation. If you apologize when we get back, Mother will forgive you. The Tudor family knows what kind of person you and your grandmother were. You don't need to pay any mind to what others are saying. A wave of helplessness washed over me. He was always like this. When I was on the verge of breaking down, on the edge of madness, he'd calmly say, don't pay it any mind. As if I were the one overreacting, but he wasn't the one being slandered. Of course he didn't need to care. The car pulled smoothly up to the Tudor mansion's gate. I didn't wait for David, striding straight toward my room. Mrs. Tudor was still sitting on my bed, crying, surrounded by a circle of wealthy ladies offering comfort. Bang. The door slammed against the wall. Mrs. Tudor's eyes flickered with momentary panic when she saw me. Elena, why are you back? I tossed my bag to the floor, a dull ache throbbing in my chest. Am I not welcome now that I'm back? Her best friend immediately jumped to her defense. Elena, what kind of attitude is that? Is that how you speak to your elders? Elders? I let out a bitter laugh. I'm an orphan. I only had a grandmother. And she died years ago. Which elder are you referring to? Mrs. Yerke froze, her face flushing with anger. She'd never expected the old Elena, who'd only hung her head and smiled apologetically when scolded, to talk back like this. But the Tudors were never short of lackeys. A younger lady in the crowd spoke up. Miss Elena, everything you wear, eat, and use comes from the Tudors. What would an old maid's granddaughter know about studying design without the Tudors' support? You owe everything you have today to the Tudors. It's not an exaggeration to call Mrs. Tudor your second mother. The others murmured an agreement. That was when David walked in. Seeing the tense standoff between me and his mother, his gaze turned as cold as ice. Elena, what do you think you're doing? I tore my eyes away. Even though I thought I'd let it all go, my heart still ached uncontrollably. So this was the family I'd once believed in. Nothing much, I said. It seems there are some misunderstandings about me, and I'd like to clear them up. David still frowned at me. Elena, is there anything wrong with what they're saying? What do you need to clarify? I didn't look at him. Speaking calmly, first, my tuition and living expenses have nothing to do with the Tudor family. A laugh erupted from the crowd. Nothing to do with the Tudors? You expect us to believe she earned it all herself? Mrs. Tudor looked at me with a pained expression. Elena, I know you're proud, but with your engagement to David, no one would blame you for using his money for school. Her tone was calm, but there was a flicker of resentment in her eyes. Resentment that I'd been so ungrateful as to storm back and disrupt the party in front of everyone. I smiled at David. David, your mother says it's fine that I used your money for school. What do you think? Of course it's fine, David answered instinctively, but halfway through, he froze and looked up sharply. Mother, weren't you covering Elena's school expenses? So that was it. Mother and son had both assumed I was leeching off the other. No wonder they both treated me with such arrogance. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. They were all old hands in the business world. One look at the Tudors' reactions, and they understood everything. Only Mrs. York, Mrs. Tudor's best friend, kept up her attack. Tuition and living expenses are trivial. You've lived in the Tudor household for years. Everything, food, clothes, shelter, has been taken care of by QIUU. Ignoring her aggression, I went on. Second, if we're keeping score, it's the Tudors who owe me. I lived in my own home until I was 18. After my grandmother died that year, I moved into the Tudors' house. Mrs. York pounced, as if she'd found her smoking gun. That's still 5 or 6 years. You've lived in a villa in the most expensive neighborhood in Ness City, eaten ingredients flown in from around the world daily. Not to mention the exposure you've had to the world. Just the rent and food alone would take you a lifetime to pay back. And you have the nerve to say the Tudors owe you? Someone else chimed in. Besides, the university has dorms. She commuted back and forth every day just because she looked down on the dorm conditions. Mrs. Tudor's expression softened slightly at that, while David stared at my face, his thoughts unreadable. I turned to the speaker, smiling faintly. My grandmother was David's nanny, but after she died, the Tudors never hired a new one. Guess who took over all her work? I don't suppose a live-in nanny would be expected to pay rent, would she? The room fell silent. Some began to recall my time at the Tudors. Yeah, that girl worked hard. I heard the Tudor boy was in poor health and picky about food. She'd get up at 5 every morning to make him porridge. My son told me David never lifted a finger for anything at school. Elena handled everything for him. Didn't Eleanor say she treated her like a daughter? Is this how she treats her own daughter? Mrs. Tudor's expression, which had just lightened, darkened again. I brushed a strand of hair back, ready to go on. Enough. David, who'd been silent the whole time, suddenly spoke up, breaking the tension. Elena, come with me, we need to talk. I sat in the chair, my heart aching sharply. Talk about what? David and I had known each other for 14 years. I'd wanted to talk things through with him countless times, but he'd only ever left me with cold, retreating figure. Now, at last, he wanted to talk. It's a shame, but the chance has passed. I pressed on, ignoring him. Third, to those speculating that my grandmother deliberately tricked the family into this engagement, save your breath. I told Mrs. Tudor yesterday David and I are done. Mrs. Tudor, isn't that right? Mrs. Tudor's face paled. Her usual dignified and elegant composure gave way to a touch of disarray. The room fell silent at Mrs. York's signal. The guests filed out in 2s and 3s. Only the 3 of us remained. David's face was ashen, his voice trembling slightly. Elena, you didn't mean that. It was just anger talking, wasn't it? I didn't answer. I glanced at him, then turned for the door. The driver was already waiting outside. I hurried toward the car, leaving David's shouts far behind. Let's go. Doctor. Elena, don't leave. At the moment I closed the door, a bony, well-defined hand jammed in. A low, muffled groan came from outside. Are you crazy? I instinctively let go. David's palm was bruised purple. But he seemed not to feel the pain, clinging to the door as tightly as ever. Noticing me staring at his hand, David managed a bitter smile. His eyes burning with a morbid fixation. Elena, does this make you even a little less angry? The only reply he got was the loud slam of the car door. In the rearview mirror, David's smile froze. His figure shrank smaller and smaller. He didn't chase after me. He just stood there, like a statue being pelted by the rain. Life in Sea State was far more pleasant than I'd imagined. Luna and I opened a fashion design studio together. Beneath the sunset, we'd lie on the beach, checking out guys with 8-pack abs, calling it studying human anatomy. Of course, I never thought David would track me down at the studio door. A man in a black suit leaned against the wall, his face cold and distant, turning quite a few heads among the passing girls. Spotting me, he quickly stubbed out his cigarette. His voice raspy. Elena, long time no see. It hadn't been that long, and no poema. Only a few months since we'd last met. I said nothing, walking straight past him. David grabbed my shoulder, his eyes frantic with regret. Elena, give me a chance to explain it. That's not what you think. I was curious to hear what kind of explanation he'd come up with inside the studio. David looked around at my designs, his expression complicated. Elena, did you design all these? I was wondering if I cut him off. Get to the point. David looked flustered, but seeing my impatience, he held back. After a long pause, he spoke slowly. Elena, that I was wrong that night at the bar. But it was because Sarah was there. You know, my father's car accident was suspicious. Rumors once said the Stewarts were behind it. But without proof, it was ruled an accident. I got close to Sarah to see if I could get something on them through her. David rambled on about meeting Sarah, getting evidence to take down the Stewarts, and hiding the truth from me to protect me. But gradually, his voice faded because he saw not a flicker of emotion on my face. Elena, what's wrong? My voice was calm, but my words hit David like a thunderclap. I already knew all that. I wasn't stupid. After living with the Tudors for so long, I understood some things better than David himself. I knew the obsession that had consumed David all these years. I saw the dark look in his eyes whenever he was with Sarah. I'd always known David would never rest until he'd settled scores with the Stewarts. The one who didn't understand was David. He stared at me, his pupils constricting slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. Elena, what did you say? I took a deep breath, reluctant to revisit those painful years. David, the reason I wanted to leave wasn't Sarah, it was you. I did love you, once, but all you ever gave me was coldness, day in and day out. I even thought your lack of refusal meant maybe, one day, my love would move you. But that day at the bar, you made me see the truth. Even if we'd married, I'd never have been happy. Because the biggest problem between us wasn't that you didn't love me, it was that you didn't respect me at all. That's not true. David's face went white, his voice weak with denial. Elena, no Elena, no. That's not it. I just don't know how to love someone. Is it that you don't know how to love someone? Or that you don't know how to love someone so beneath you, someone whose love would shame you? All those years, I've lived in fear of David's coldness. But every time I tried to let go, a crumb of his kindness would pull me back, drowning me in deeper self-doubt. Until that day in the bar. When I tasted the salt of my tears, it finally hit me. He did love me, but he was angry. Angry at himself for loving someone like me. In front of everyone, Luna and I stuck to our routine, working by day, heading to the beach at dusk to study. David rented a place nearby every day. He'd linger outside the studio, too afraid to come in when Luna and I stepped out. He'd trail behind at a distance sometimes. If we laughed over something, he'd tentatively chime in with a stilted remark, but at the first frost in my expression, he'd fall silent and retreat. On the beach, waves rolled in one after another far off. The Santa Monica Pier flickered with a scatter of lights. Luna arched an eyebrow, nodding in a direction. Elena, look at him. Poor guy. I followed her gaze. David sat alone on the steps, his silhouette nerve thin in the twilight. Catching my eye, he forced an ingratiating smile. He did look pitiful, but compared to the years of coldness and disdain I'd endured, it meant nothing. Suddenly, his smile froze, his pupils contracted sharply. Bang. A shrill gunshot shattered the peace. The crowd erupted into chaos. Elena. That familiar voice cut through the noise. Dazed, I turned to see David sprinting toward me, putting every last ounce of strength into his run. He crashed down on top of me. A thick metallic stench filled the air. Warm liquid soaked through my shirt. David. I tried to sit up to check his wound, but he held me down. Don't move. His voice was faint, but his grip was surprisingly strong. Elena, stay down. It's not safe yet. The hospital reeked of disinfectant. Luna handed me a coffee, sitting down beside me, hesitation in her tone. Elena, do you think you and David should talk this through properly? I stared at my shoes, the beach scene were playing in my mind. Luna, you know what? When David tackled me, felt grateful. Stared shocked but not a single ounce of distress. Back then, if he'd so much as scraped his hand playing ball, my heart would have ached for him. Luna, we really can't go back. Before I finished, a soft sound came from the bed. I glanced over instinctively. David was awake, his eyes fixed on me, brimming with tears. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but only a choked sob escaped. David, I started to speak, but hesitated. Should I thank him first? Or tell him it was truly over? David lifted a hand to stop me, managing a smile uglier than tears. Elena, promise me one thing: when you get married, don't send me an invitation. The room fell eerily silent, save for the steady beep of monitors. David turned his head to stare out the window. After a long while, his voice came, raw and hoarse. Elena, we're even now. The tutors will be here soon. You should go. I stared at his pale face, taken aback. You're wound after all, you saved me. Go. David kept me off, his voice trembling. Just let me be alone for a while. I took one last look at him, pushed open the door, and walked forward without looking back.